The lawyer had barely finished reading the fourth line when Camilla's son stopped him. "Read that again." But Prince William wasn't looking at the document anymore. He was holding out a ring of 3 antique keys, not offering them, taking them back. Across the table, nobody moved. Not Camilla, not her children, not even King Charles, who had spent years allowing one dangerous assumption to settle over the family like dust. Ravensmere estate would eventually belong to Camilla's side, except the lawyers had just confirmed something brutal. It didn't belong to them now, it had never belonged to them. But that wasn't the part that made Charles lower his eyes. The real humiliation was buried on the final page beneath the signature of a man everyone assumed had been forgotten, Prince Edward. 3 hours earlier, Camilla's family had arrived expecting a private formality. No argument, no confrontation, just paperwork. The estate had been treated as settled business for nearly 15 years. 12,000 acres, a Jacobean manor, 42 cottages, 2 working farms, a private lake, paintings that had never appeared in any public inventory. Even the staff behaved as though the future ownership had already been decided. They referred to one upstairs room as Mr. Parker B.S.'s study. That morning, fresh flowers had been placed inside it. Then William arrived. No motorcade, no announcement, just one dark vehicle passing through the eastern gates at 8:46 in the morning. He wasn't alone. 2 solicitors stepped out behind him carrying identical black document cases. That was the first warning. The second came when William refused to enter through the main doors. He walked around the side of the house, crossed the wet gravel courtyard, then entered through the old estate office where land records had been stored since the reign of Queen Victoria. Why would the Prince of Wales ignore the drawing room and go straight to the records? Because this wasn't a family meeting, it was an execution. By 9:05, Camilla had been told William was inside. She reportedly thought he had come to discuss renovations. The east wing needed structural work. 2 roofs were leaking. There had even been quiet conversations about converting several cottages from members of her extended family. Charles had apparently encouraged the idea. Not formally, that would matter later, but privately in the way powerful families make promises when they believe nobody will ever demand proof. You'll always have Ravensmere, 5 harmless words. Except harmless words become dangerous when someone starts spending money because they believe them. Plans had been drawn, furniture had been measured. One relative had already discussed moving a collection of horses onto the southern paddocks. Camilla's son had reportedly been shown the wine cellar and told which bottles were considered part of the house. Imagine hearing that for years. Imagine being treated like the future owner every time you entered the gates. Then imagine William placing a 6-page legal opinion on the table and saying, "None of you were ever beneficiaries." That sentence didn't just change the meeting, it changed the past. Suddenly, every promise sounded different. Every renovation became questionable. Every room they had started calling their own belonged to someone else. But who? That was the question William refused to answer. Not yet. Camilla entered the estate office shortly after 9:20. Charles followed several minutes later, visibly irritated that the matter had not been brought to him first. William didn't stand. That detail alone turned the temperature in the room. He remained seated beside the lead solicitor, one hand resting on a faded leather folder. Charles looked at it immediately. He recognized the crest. It belonged to his grandmother, the Queen Mother, and that was when the confidence left his face. Ravensmere had not been purchased by Charles. It hadn't been granted to Camilla. It wasn't Crown Estate property either. It sat inside a private family settlement created decades earlier, then amended 3 times. The First Amendment protected the land. The Second protected the house. But the Third Amendment protected something nobody in that room had thought to check, the succession clause. Charles had been given what lawyers call a life interest. He could use Ravensmere, he could maintain it. He could receive certain income generated by the farms, but he could not permanently transfer it outside the bloodline named in the settlement. Not by promise, not by letter, not even by royal command. Camilla's daughter asked the obvious question. If His Majesty controls it during his lifetime, why can't he choose what happens afterward? One solicitor opened the folder because that choice was removed before his marriage. Silence, not after the wedding. Before it, someone had anticipated this exact fight years before anyone else realized there would be one. Wait, who? The answer should have been Queen Elizabeth. Everyone looked toward William, expecting him to say her name. He didn't. The amendment had been signed in 1999, 3 years before the Queen Mother died, 6 years before Charles married Camilla, and next to her signature was another Princess Margaret's. Now the room was no longer merely tense, it was personal. Margaret had been one of the original trustees, sharp-eyed, suspicious, fiercely protective of family property. According to the documents, she had raised the concern that Ravensmere could one day pass through marriage into a family never named by the original settler. She didn't accuse anyone. She didn't have to. The wording was cold enough. No spouse, child of a spouse, or descendant unrelated by blood to King George V, 6 shall acquire permanent title, controlling interest, or beneficial ownership. Camilla's children weren't being singled out by name. That almost made it worse. They had been excluded as a category before the marriage had even happened. Charles leaned toward the solicitor. "I was never informed of this." William finally looked at him. "You signed acknowledgement of it. That was the first real blow." A photocopy was placed on the table. There was Charles's signature at the bottom, dated November 1999. But something didn't make sense. When the fighting ended, millions were dead. If Charles had signed it, how could he honestly believe Ravensmere could pass to Camilla's family? He turned the page over, looked at the date again, then at William, and for several seconds the King of the United Kingdom appeared to have no answer. The solicitor did. The acknowledgement had been attached to a broader financial restructuring involving 6 properties. Ravensmere appeared only twice, once by its legal parcel number and once under an older name that hadn't been used publicly since 1936. Charles may have signed without realizing what the clause meant, or he may have realized, then convinced himself it could be changed later. But there was another problem. The clause could be changed. That's what Camilla's family had been counting on. All Charles needed was the consent of the surviving trustees, except there was only one surviving trustee whose approval mattered: Prince William. Now you see why he was holding the keys. Charles had approached him months earlier, not directly. That would have looked too obvious. A palace aide had reportedly sent William a proposal describing the future of Ravensmere as a continuity arrangement. Continuity. A beautiful word for making a private promise permanent. William asked one question: who receives the beneficial interest? The answer came back 2 days later. A new family trust would be created. Its beneficiaries would include Camilla's children and grandchildren. William refused. No negotiation, no conditions, just one word written in the margin: rejected. But Charles hadn't stopped. A second proposal followed. This one was more careful. Camilla's family would not own Ravensmere directly. They would receive a 99-year lease at a nominal annual rent of £1. Technically, the estate would remain inside the royal settlement. Practically, William and his children would be locked out for a century. Clever. Almost clever enough, except the Queen Mother had anticipated leases too. Any agreement longer than 21 years required unanimous trustee approval. William rejected that one as well. That should have ended it. But 3 weeks later, contractors appeared at Ravensmere, not for repairs, for a private residential survey. They measured the west wing, inspected the kitchens, assessed whether the old nursery corridor could become self-contained family apartments. Nobody told William. The invoice was charged to an estate maintenance account he now helped oversee. That was the mistake. A payment of $18,400 had been buried between roof repairs and agricultural drainage work. The amount wasn't what caught his eye. The description did. Future occupancy adaptation. Future occupancy by whom? William requested every recent invoice connected to the property. Then he found the furniture order. Custom shelving, a temperature-controlled wine room, 2 bathrooms redesigned for private residence. The delivery name was not Charles. It was not Camilla. It was Parker B.S. If this twisted legal chess match has already made you look twice at every palace promise, subscribe now, because William still hadn't revealed the document that would turn a property dispute into a family reckoning. Back inside the estate office, Camilla argued that no one had attempted to seize anything. The surveys were only preliminary. The furniture had not been installed, no lease had been signed, all technically true. But William wasn't accusing them of theft. He was doing something more devastating. He was proving they had prepared to inherit something they had no legal right to receive. Camilla's son pushed the folder away. "We acted on assurances," William answered quietly. "Assurances are not ownership." That line landed harder than shouting would have, because everyone knew who had given those assurances: Charles. The king turned toward William. "This could have been handled privately." "It was private," William replied, "until money from the estate was used." There it was. The point Charles couldn't brush aside. Royal families survive embarrassment through silence, but financial records don't care about silence. Once trust money had been spent preparing the property for future occupants who weren't beneficiaries, William had a duty to challenge it. At least that was his legal position. But Camilla saw something else, a warning not only to her children, to her. Because Ravensmere wasn't the only property governed by old family settlements. If William was willing to dig through one forgotten leather folder, what else might he find? That question changed her approach. She stopped arguing about ownership. She asked who would inherit instead. William didn't answer. He gestured to the lawyer. The 4th page was read aloud. Upon the termination of Charles's life interest, the estate would pass to the next eligible beneficiary named by the trustees. Camilla's daughter interrupted. "That's William. It should have been." But William had formally renounced his personal claim 9 days earlier. Nobody in the room knew. Not Charles, not Camilla, not even most palace advisors. Why would William fight to protect an estate then refuse to inherit it? Because he didn't want the house. He wanted control over what happened to it. And renouncing his claim activated a clause that had remained dormant for 27 years. The estate would pass to the next sibling named in the Queen Mother's amendment, Prince Harry. No, Harry's name was not included. Princess Anne, she was included, but had declined the succession in a sealed declaration submitted years earlier. That left one person, Prince Andrew. For one terrible second, Charles thought the situation had become even worse. Then the solicitor turned the page. Andrew had been removed from eligibility under a conduct provision triggered by withdrawal from official royal duties. So who remained? Prince Edward. That was when Camilla's son said, "Read that again." Prince Edward, Duke of Edinburgh, would become the beneficial successor to Ravensmere. But even that wasn't the full reveal. Edward had been informed weeks earlier. He had already accepted quietly. No public victory, no gloating, no demand to inspect the bedrooms. He submitted one condition. Ravensmere would never become his private family home. Instead, its farms, cottages, and annual income would be placed into a new charitable foundation supporting veterans, bereaved military families, and young people leaving care. The manor itself would become a residential retreat for families of service members undergoing long-term medical treatment. Edward inherited the estate, then gave away almost everything it could earn him. That was the twist nobody in the room had prepared for. Camilla's family hadn't lost Ravensmere to a greedy prince. They had lost it to a man who refused to treat it as personal property at all. Charles stared at the proposal. The estate he had promised privately to one side of the family would now carry another brother's name through a public foundation. Every restored cottage would become proof that Charles's assurance had meant nothing. Every family admitted through those gates would quietly remind the palace that Edward had turned an inheritance into service, while others had been measuring bedrooms. William slid the keys across the table, not toward Camilla, toward Edward's solicitor. The oldest key opened the archive room. The second opened the manor. The third opened a tiny chapel near the northern boundary, a place Edward had visited once as a boy with his grandmother. According to the final page, that chapel was the only part of Ravensmere he intended to reserve for his family not to live in. To remember her, Charles finally spoke. "You arranged all of this without coming to me?" William's reply was almost gentle. "You had already made your arrangement. That was the humiliation." Charles wasn't defeated by rebellion. He was defeated by his own paperwork, by a signature he had forgotten, by promises he could never legally keep, by a younger brother who took the prize, then stripped it of personal value before anyone could accuse him of ambition. But Camilla had one final question. What happens to the rooms already prepared? The solicitor closed the folder. They will be returned to the estate inventory. The custom shelving would be removed. The private study designation would disappear. The wine collection would remain untouched. Even the fresh flowers placed that morning were carried out before sunset. By evening, the brass nameplate on the upstairs door had been unscrewed. No announcement came from the palace. No statement corrected the years of quiet assumptions. Visitors driving past the gates saw nothing unusual. But inside the manor, one small thing had changed. The keys no longer hung beneath Charles's portrait. They were placed inside a plain wooden box beside a photograph of the Queen Mother and a handwritten note from Edward. It contained only 7 words. "Let this house belong to those who need it. So tell me who really won that morning. William Edward or the woman who locked the future away in 1999? Leave your answer below, then subscribe, because the palace thought it was fighting over a house. But the final key had opened something far more dangerous.